So welcome everyone, Cyndi Suarez here from NPQ. And in this webinar, we will explore archetypes. Put simply, archetypes are universal patterns and images that are part of the collective unconscious. In other words, it is a recurring pattern of behavior. The same archetypes that play out in society exist in the nonprofit sector and social change work. Today's guests have written about archetypes affecting the leadership of Black women for NPQ's Spring Magazine issue, which focuses on the experiences of these leaders in the nonprofit sector. So for the next 90 minutes, we're gonna dig deeper into this. And we'll start, I'm gonna ask the participants to introduce yourselves and by stating your name, your role, your organization, and why you decided to write about archetypes for this issue. I'll ask you to start, Yanique.
Thank you so much, Cyndi. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for this beautiful issue. For today's conversation, I am the author of White Women Cry and Call Me Angry, a Black woman's memoir on racism and philanthropy, which you can only find on my website, whitewomencry.com. The book is about my experiences of racial aggression and abuse when I served as the president and CEO of IF, a foundation for radical possibility, which is a private foundation doing the work in Washington, D.C. Okay. So I left IF in 2022 after 10 years at the organization, but it will forever be my political home. This book that I thought only a couple of hundred people in my network would buy and read has been read by at least 2,500 people at last count. And I'm really grateful for the spaces that it is allowing me to be a part of, including this one. And it is those spaces with Black women that really led me to an exploration of archetypes. And we'll talk about that some more.
Thank you. Carrie, Kay, can you say your name, your role, your organization, and why you decided to write about archetypes?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, Cyndi. Thanks to Yanique and to Whitney as well. Kerrien Suarez. I'm the president and CEO of Equity in the Center. And Whitney and I decided to write about archetypes because our piece is co-written because the three archetypes we talk about, so the mammy, the magical superwoman, and the angry Black woman, are three tropes that we discuss almost constantly in our conversations about being a Black woman in leadership. And the quote that opens the article, I said in response to Whitney during an interview on Black-led leadership, and it never came together quite so as during that conversation. But I think the article is an extension of our ongoing work together to support one another and to better understand how to navigate what we face as Black women leaders on a daily basis.
Thank you. If you can remember that quote, Kay, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, I can read it. Okay. I think there are a lot of things that have been said to me, even by members of my own team, that would not have been said if I presented with another identity. People demand things of me, often disrespectfully, because there's an unconscious belief that Black women exist to care for and serve the needs of others. There's the trope of the mammy, the beneficent, all-powerful mother who is supposed to take care of everybody's emotional and physical needs. The flip side of that coin is the angry Black woman who hurts everyone's feelings. And then there's the magical superwoman who can do everything for everybody immediately, regardless of organizational constraints like timelines or budgets. Folks, including other Black people, have been socialized to believe that I owe them my labor as a human being. And I feel that every day, and I know from talking to my colleagues and to each of you that I'm not alone.
Thank you, Kay. Whitney.
Hi, everyone. So great to be with you all today. My name is Whitney Parnell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and CEO of Service Never Sleeps. And as Kay shared, I was first introduced to the synthesis of these three tropes when I was interviewing Kay 2 years ago at this point for this research project that we're going to be releasing this summer called What Does It Mean to Be Black-Led? And she brought up those three tropes of angry mammy, superwoman, and I just say my life was transformed since she put it so clearly and brilliantly. And then all throughout last year, I remember just consistently processing my experience with Kay specifically and other Black women in general, and how critical those tropes have been to realizing that this was a systemic issue happening here that was a shared experience among so many Black women leaders. So part of the why behind co-writing this was just to be able to have this release and unapologetically share these feelings with no censor, quite frankly, in that piece, but also to really put language to what's going on, to hopefully affirm and validate Black women, and also clarify that it's not Black women who are the problem here, it's misogynoir. And so that those were some of the main inspirations for writing.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's dig into the archetypes. Let's start with you, Yanique. Can you describe the archetypes that you write about and how they impact Black women's leadership?
Yeah, so first, just want to talk about how I came to be even thinking about archetypes. After the book was published, people are reaching out to me. They're saying things like, "You've written my life." I'm hosting, conversations with Black women, and somebody would say, "I'm dealing with Roberta right now," right? So Roberta is one of the kind of characters in one of my essays. Or I thought this was funny. Someone was telling me about a a person named Vicky, and I thought she was referring to Nikki, who is another character in my book. And she's like, "No, no, 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 your Nikki is my Vicky," right? So it was like that, just on and on, people resonating and telling me that they know exactly the person in the book. And so I was at a book talk in New York, in Harlem, group of Black women and women of color. And I just started to ask, "Do you know Roberta? Do you know Nikki?" And everyone like around the room could attest to knowing the characters in the book. So that's what got me wondering about archetypes. And of course, I'd been familiar with the ones that are used to describe Black women, especially, but I really didn't know of many for white women. I knew about Karen, right? Like that's the famous one. But I didn't or hadn't heard about or seen other archetypes of white women. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity because it allowed me to tease out, for the purpose of helping Black women to name their experiences, name the type of person that they come in contact with so that they can externalize, right? Because I think what I am experiencing from Black women is that they're internalizing what has been happening to them, happening to us. And so this was a way to say, "No, no, no, this is not about you. This is external to you," so that you can see it really clearly and deal with it by knowing how to point to the right kind of source of harm. It's not you, it's not inside of you. And so this article, I name a few based on my own experience. I'll just talk about a couple now. This one I named Christy, uber progressive, very conservative, very racist family. This person might be someone married to a Black person, right? Has mixed race kids, right? And because she has been able to see the humanity in her own spouse, her own kids, she desperately wants it to be that way, period. Like, I don't want anyone to like not see someone's humanity because of their race. And because she is running away from her own past, her own racist past, she is running right into race, right? As she denies that it is a factor in the lives of Black people. And so for me, my Christy came into my office one day, I'm the CEO, right? And asks me, a Black woman, to look at a picture of her mixed race granddaughter on her phone, right? Her Black granddaughter, and ask me, does she look that Black to you? Right. And so I am stunned in this moment. Like, imagine she's come into my office, she's shown me this picture, she's asked me this question. I'm Black, she's white, and I don't know what to say or how to respond, right? And so this kind of person, this kind of archetype, I wonder if people on the call know. Do you know Christy? I'll just choose another one. I'm gonna choose Rose. So Rose is also liberal. She's Jewish, very vocal about the experiences of her ancestors, as she should. But because of her people's history of oppression and her own experiences of oppression, she believes that she can't also be oppressive. She doesn't like the word white because she identifies as white, and yet the way in which whiteness is characterized bothers her. So, and I've had this very experience with Rose. She says, instead of using the term white, let's say white Protestant, because then she can be outside of the problematic aspects of whiteness, right? Because she's not white and Protestant, she's white and Jewish. And this all while being openly and loudly anti-Black. And when challenged, becomes very defensive and aggressive. And so I've had this experience. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I wonder if you know Rose. And so these are just a couple. I name about 5 of them for this article based on what I've written about in my book and just what I've experienced from talking to Black women about their own experiences.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about a few more if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Because not everyone would have read the articles. It's just coming out now. So who's Lauren?
Lauren. Lauren is interesting. I almost didn't write about Lauren. My experience with Lauren, I was at a very large business meeting, mostly white people at that business meeting. And Lauren was the chair of the board and for this organization, and I was going to be the incoming chair. And she is opening the meeting. I'm supposed to be introducing the speaker for the meeting, and she invites me to the stage as Sunshine because she says, because I'm wearing a yellow jacket. And this is the same woman who had been resisting the work on anti-racism that I and others had been pushing. So I think without that context, it could have been a simple joke, but with the context of like pushing back, not wanting to do the work of anti-racism, it was clear to me that this was a way to like shrink me and belittle me in front of this large group of people. So again, I'm shocked, I'm stunned. My name is Dr. Yanique Redwood, and I'm being called to the stage as Sunshine. Everyone's in laughter, like uproarious laughter. So I'm getting to the stage, I'm dizzy. I'm like, can I just get to the podium and hold on? And I do, and I deliver like we always do. And then I sit back down and the speaker comes to the stage, a white man. He doesn't have a PhD. And he says, thank you, Sunshine, right? So then the room is in stitches again, right? So twice in this business meeting of white people, I am being referred to as Sunshine when my name that I worked for, in many ways worked for the doctor. And when I got a divorce to try to get back my last name, Dr. Yanique Redwood, eliminated from my introductions. And so Lauren is a white woman. She is not highly educated. but she has institutional power. She maybe has economic power. This Lauren was very, very Southern. So the accent was very Southern. Like I just had this feel around her that at any moment something was going to come up that reminded me of the plantation or a plantation past. And I just remember one thing she said in a meeting was she went to a dinner event and not even the servers were Black. And I think she thought she was saying something really interesting by saying, you know, she was in an all-white space and she couldn't believe how white it was. But she said, I was in a space and not even the servers were Black. It's just stunning. And so, and this was at a board meeting, right? No one said anything. We're all like just sitting around like, what just happened? And so that's Lauren. Lauren is that that's the archetype. And I don't know if many of us know that one, because I think because of the circles we're in, people kind of learn some of the things to say and not say. So you may not hit a Lauren a lot because she's not quite liberal, but I have experienced Lauren, and I wonder if others have too.
Okay, what about Beth?
Beth. I experienced Beth in my neighborhood, so it wasn't at work, but I imagine Beth at work. She is a young, white, liberal professional, very educated, works in largely white spaces, staunch feminist, super ambitious. But as soon as there's conflict, she invokes authority to solve problems that don't require it. And so in my experience, I remember we were debating something with the condo association, and as soon as it got to be a conflict, she was about getting lawyered up at a time in the conversation that didn't require it. She questions Black women's qualifications. She'll talk over us. And when pressed, this is the key point here, when pressed, will cry as if on cue. So going from being very brash and forthright to being very fragile and victimized. And this fragility is super powerful, right? People rush to her rescue. And I know for certain, that many of you know Beth because I hear this one over and over again.
Okay, last one. I just want everybody to know Nancy. Tell us about Nancy.
Oh, Nancy. Nancy is also liberal. She is a white woman you think about when you think of allyship. She is disarming. She checks all the boxes. She's doing all the things that we want in allies. She's saying all the right things, right? And you come to believe that you can be in relationship. You can risk something a little bit more professional with Nancy. But she has this insecurity that causes you to pause. Like you can't quite put your finger on it, but you feel it. And you notice that there's a self-examination that you would come to expect from this kind of person, but it doesn't feel deep enough. So you're confused in your relationship. One day you're thinking, okay, this is the ally for the work that I need to do, the anti-racist work I need to do. And then in another circumstance, you're not sure. Mm-hmm. And then one day out of the blue, like you're in some conversation, you're not even thinking about race, and out of the blue, her true colors emerge and you have your answer. And I just wanted to say, Cyndi, that I had a really hard time with this because I'm not trying to demonize people. That is not the goal here. So I kept trying to figure out how to thread this needle, like how to talk about these archetypes, how to help maybe Black women have some more literacy around these archetypes so that they can spot them and externalize, right? Like say, oh, what's happening here is not about me. It's about the system that this person is a part of. And at the same time, wrestling with, creating these archetypes, because archetypes end up being harmful. I mean, they've been harmful for Black women. As I know Kay and Whitney will be talking about. So I didn't want to do that, but I took the risk because I thought the kind of power that white women have in the third sector, I don't think this article is going to cause so much damage. And I was weighing that against what it could do for Black women and for other women of color. And I decided that the risk was worth it. That's the same thing with the book. It's like, I didn't want to call this out. And at the same time, I thought this risk, I hope it's worth it for Black women to know and to feel like it's not me, right? I've had so many women say, for the first time, I understand that this is not about me. So I just wanted to say that's the needle I was trying to thread. That's the risk I was weighing, and ultimately believe that when we speak our truth, we give space for Black women to heal.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, those explanations and the stories that are behind them. I guess one of the things that comes to mind as I hear you is there was no archetype of someone who was just authentically an ally.
Yeah, I could have. I do know a couple of examples. I do know a couple of examples. And part of the process of the book and this article was just trying to really stay focused, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe there are other people who really want to lift that up. And I hope they do, and I hope it helps. But for me, at this point in my journey, I have to be very clear about what I am doing and what I am trying to invoke. People ask me, well, what do you want white people to do with this book? And I say, I don't care what white people do with this book. It's not my ministry right now. I've done that. I spent so many years caring about what white people think, what white people say, what they do, what they think of me. How do I look? I just, at this moment in my journey, can't spend that kind of energy on white people and what they do, what they think, what does it look like to, I just don't want to. I want to focus on, if I do it for Black women, to be aware, to be, I don't like to use the word armed, but just to have the literacy to know what they're up against.
Thank you. And I'm just looking at the Q&A real quick. And a lot of folks are saying that they recognize some of these archetypes, and a few folks are saying that your audio is going in and out and they really want to hear what you're saying. So yeah, that's what they were suggesting, although, you spoke, so we got to see you. I really wanted to see you as well, but maybe that'll help. Okay, let's move on to Kay and Whitney. I'll have you start, Kay. Can you tell us about the archetypes that you wrote about and how you or other women experienced them, how that impacts Black women's leadership?
Sure. I think the Mammy archetype is most difficult to talk about. It's hard to say out loud. It's hard to say, it's hard to hear. I think for a long time, as I was navigating my role, the word Mammy would come into my conscious mind and I would suppress it. And so it kept happening. And so eventually I had to pay attention to it, and I started talking to Whitney and others. But the so what there is that people think I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. I think that shows up in the outside world, the non-work world, by people's expectation that I hold the door open for them, that I step aside for them on the sidewalk still in 2024. And in interactions with me in professional spaces, back in the amygdala, there's the expectation that a white woman is here, a Black woman, excuse me, is here to serve. And I think that shows up across conversations in the workplace, in your personal life, and folks' expectation that I take care of them above all else, that I owe them the world. I have limited time and a limited budget, but I should give them more than anyone has ever before. And whatever the challenge is, I should be able to meet and exceed it for their benefit. And I'm not generally a part of the equation. I have had the opportunity to work with some fabulous allies who are able to center my experience and in an intersectional context, not just for me, but for folks of many identities. I've also had the privilege of working with a male partner who did that for me. I know Whitney has had that experience as well. So it is possible. And it is profoundly supportive, but I find that most often I'm feeling Mammy as the top note, particularly in challenging management conversations. There is, of course, the superwoman, because we're expected. And as Yanique said, it's not that we're expected, but that we always deliver. And the Harriet doctrine, as I think Girl Trek has advanced it, is save yourself first. So we don't always save ourselves first. I'm in the season of save myself first, so I won't be able to help anyone else. But we always deliver for our families and for our communities, because but for us, we might die. And we bring that energy into a lot of spaces. So we deliver consistently. And one thing I thought about with these archetypes, and Whitney and I have talked a lot about, is our own complicity in them. So I am going to deliver. I'm going to do my best to deliver. So I am participating in and advancing the archetype as it also works against me in some ways, because there are unrealistic expectations of my capacity as a human being. And then with the angry Black woman, which we encounter, quite often, I have to be very careful with my words, because if I say something pointed, it will land as angry. And I think that's come up for me a lot recently as I operate at the edge of my capacity as a human being, with a toddler and a tween, a full-time job. I've been very conscious, in recent weeks, of things that I've said that are pointed that I know will land. It's like, okay, well, here I go. I'm in the angry Black woman vernacular now. But Mammy, I think, is the one that has been the most deeply affecting to me, because it's ugly. And there was a time where I was afraid to say it out loud. To Whitney, to other, Black women leaders, and afraid almost to think about it because of the legacy of the United States and our history and the role that Black women played while enslaved, and then in the centuries since. So that has been the most surprising aspect of my leadership, is the presence of that archetype and how people receive, interact with, and speak to me. Above all, I'd say how they speak to me.
Do you have an example you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, could you repeat that, Cyndi? I couldn't.
Do you have an example that you feel comfortable sharing?
I think a recent one is that a colleague said that they expected me to take care of their emotional needs, and that was actually my job. I think there are some generational differences in expectations of the workplace, and I think that comment aligns to that. And I've heard a version of that multiple times over the years from folks that are part of my team. I think Equity in the Center, because of what we do try very hard to operationalize equity through benefits, which allow folks some structure, some infrastructure to take care of their needs health-wise, mental health, physical health, and then some. And in my role, that is my obligation, I feel. I'm not here to be your therapist or your mother. And I know women in leadership across racial identities often find themselves in conversations where they have been pegged and backed into the mother corner. And I think that shows up in a particular way for Black women. And the extent to which people have expected me to do emotional labor for them, to help them to process at my own expense. I have had some white colleagues actually tell me that it's my job to do that. So things like that, the anger that has been lobbed my way around management and staff decisions that people don't like. Yeah, so just pointed disrespect, I would say, where my authority, competency to do my job, the literal job that some of these folks actually retained me to do, is called into question in a way that I've never experienced in the professional workplace context, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you for that. And I just if I can ask, just going even deeper into that, how would you take care of somebody else's emotional needs at work? Like, what is the expectation?
I was quite clear that that expectation has no place at work, and that work is not somewhere someone of my particular generation or in my role, that I don't believe that work is where you go to have your emotional needs met. But I said my obligation and my role is to provide an infrastructure with benefits that would allow you to have your benefits or your emotional needs met outside of the workplace. And that's when I've talked about it with colleagues leading up to a number of these conversations and afterward. I feel that's my obligation. It is not my obligation to be your therapist or to take care of you on an emotional level in a manner that is outside of our respective roles as contained by the employment contract, the workplace, which is itself bounded by laws, which I often have to speak explicitly to because of this expectation of, in some cases, parental care. But it's really emotional labor, processing of things that are happening, of challenges that I was expected to do for them. And this is more than one individual. Just help me figure this out. Whereas a working adult might have a workplace challenge that you have to get your arms around, as we all do. There's an expectation that I, as one of my colleagues said, midwife it for them.
Oh.
And mentors and advisors, we all need those. So I'm not saying that I don't mentor folks, that I don't give advice, but in a direct reporter and a supervisory relationship, no, it is not appropriate for me to be taking care of your emotional needs, ensuring that this workplace container has a soft place for you to land in terms of access to care and the human right to withdraw and receive that care, yes. But to do emotional labor for you, and then to be told that I'm not actually doing equity if I'm not doing emotional labor for others, it's ironic. And I do want to name, as I have with Whitney and with many others, there is a generational element to this, but I just think the expectations of my labor that people will articulate to me. You know, it's like, well, I would expect you to do, well, why won't you do that for me?
Yes, got it. Whitney, I see you getting in here. What do you have to say?
Thank you so much. And really appreciate, Kay, you really laying foundation for those three tropes and helping describe them more. And so what I'll offer is that, first of all, I do just want to name that these three tropes are not the only difficulties that Black women experience in the workplace. There are so many more experienced both internally and externally, like the constant disrespect in terms of how I'm talked to and treated on a daily basis, the constant questioning and needing to prove that I know what I'm doing and what I'm talking about, how often I'm literally just not listened to or obeyed as the leader or boss, and just things being demanded of me by default as if I owe people something. So those are just to add to just clarify, it's very expansive here. But I was really grateful for Kay providing the three key tropes that are specific to the experience of trying to lead within an organization, which quite frankly, I was surprised by when I became a leader of an org. And as I get into it, what I do just want to say is that just recognizing the full topic of this, there is something to be said about the white woman dynamic under a Black woman leader, right? And Yanique really did such a great job about showing the expansiveness of that. But what I also want to name is that like these three tropes I've experienced from all identities, white women, white men, other BIPOC people, other Black people, even other Black women and Black femmes under my leadership. So I do just want to emphasize, like, that's what makes it systemic about a Black woman's leader experience, that nobody is exempt from being complicit in participating in these tropes under a Black woman leader. And so what I'll just offer is, or what I'll contribute is that I've seen how these three tropes are then used to weaponize Tema Okun's white supremacy culture. And I want to start by saying that this is an amazing lens, right? And a great reflection tool that any identity can use, which I use on myself regularly as a way to constantly improve and hold myself accountable. However, people have very specifically and intentionally weaponize white supremacy culture characteristics and leverage them to assert that my leadership isn't equitable. And all of that is rooted in those three tropes of angry, mammy, superwoman. But look, quite frankly, it is not the white supremacy characteristic of power hoarding for me to say, I've heard your suggestions and I'm making this alternative decision. That is leadership and my role of making responsible decisions that consider all of the contributions in data. It is not the white supremacy characteristic of paternalism for me to say, I'd like to receive an update on your deliverables and for me to provide feedback around that approach and timeline. That's me as a leader ensuring that things are going according to plan and offering input based on my experience. It's not the white supremacy culture characteristic of urgency when I expect a deadline to be met that the person decided to start a week ago, even though they had months to do it. And that's just me holding them accountable to their responsibilities and also looping around to why I was checking in about the status of that months ago, but was told I was being paternalistic. And it's not the white supremacy characteristic of perfectionism for me to expect quality work to be done and to provide feedback around when I want it reviewed or improved. That should be an expectation of the role, and furthermore says something that the person thought that they could not perform well or literally just do their job, knowing that here it was going to somehow magically get done. Enter magical superwoman trope. So you can see how these tropes are just woven into how people react to my leadership. But ironically, while people will want to weaponize white supremacy culture when it comes to my leadership, then at the same time, they don't want to actively apply those concepts when it comes to reflecting on their own behavior and performance. So I'll see white supremacy culture showing up when people get defensive at any form of feedback or being held accountable to doing their work, because then I'm the angry Black woman giving them feedback and the mammy who's supposed to put their care first. I see how people will claim feeling attacked or uncared for when getting feedback, especially when naming how Black woman bias is showing up there. And look, then they're demonstrating that characteristic of right to comfort over accountability and equity. And I see how hyper individualism shows up in the form of entitlement when people expect everything about my leadership and the organization to completely revolve around them and have little consideration of how their posture impacts everybody else, least of all me. And so to bring this home, this is not to say that I don't have my own work and growth to do. I always will. And I want people to give me feedback and to share honestly about their experiences. And that kind of culture and people first culture matters to me. But that is separate from what these tropes are naming and what's happening here. What I'm talking about is a very blatant defiance of me operating as a leader, and that furthermore, there isn't any grace for my humanity and the mistakes that I make. Instead, all of it just becomes more fuel for their belief that I shouldn't be leading them in the first place, and that anything less than perfection is my failure. So all in all, I just see how these tropes are just leveraged in a way that exempt people from any accountability under the guise of equity, when really accountability is critical to equity, and more glaringly I see how these tropes are a way to undermine my leadership and actually just reject my leadership altogether. And so, to be honest, being a Black woman in any position is tough, but easily, from my personal experience, it's been hardest for me as a leader. I know that there's an amount of institutional power that I technically have as a leader, and I'll always need to be accountable to ensuring that I handle that responsibly. However, as much as people claim that the higher up in an organization, the more power and respect that you get, the most powerless that I have ever felt has been in this leadership position. The most disrespected that I have ever been has been in this leadership position. The most work that I have ever had, much of which has involved in absorbing other people's work, has been in this position. And it's just not right. So, and it really just should not be this hard. And I would argue it is not this hard for other identities that hold different areas of privilege. And I'll just close by saying that on this note that it shouldn't be this hard is that I'm going out to battle every day publicly to drive this very difficult work of race equity work and face just the horrendous treatment from all angles. And I shouldn't have to battle within the organization too. For as much as people expect us to lead an organization of care, which I want to do, I want to be able to come back to an organization and receive care as well, or at base level, not be fighting these tropes and fighting to be able to lead the organization that I run and built. So that's just what I'll add there.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Whitney. I just want to highlight what you said in one of the meetings to prepare for this. You said it's like being systemically or systematically gaslit. And it's true, because you do face all this, and then it's almost like you can't talk about it. So I'm so glad that you're putting all this into words for all of the Black women leaders out there who maybe it's hard to do that. Before I go on to the next question, do you have any questions for each other or any follow-up given what's been said so far?
Question. I have a response to what Yanique shared initially, and Whitney gave voice to a lot of what I've experienced and question in terms of allegedly having reached the apex of power in an organization. As Yanique was going, or Dr. Redwood was going through the the archetypes, what I thought about was, before I came to Equity in the Center, I worked independently for a couple of years. And it took me about 12 months to realize that I was choosing unconsciously not to work with and for white people, but primarily with and for white women. And it took me a minute. And that time was very healing. It also gave me the capacity to pivot to Equity in the Center and start holding space for white folks to process what whiteness does to all people of all identities in the workplace and in the world. And often when facilitating or in transracial, cross-racial conversations about white supremacy and structural racism, the impact of what you laid out is not fully understood. And so I do think you're putting it out there as a place for people to build in terms of their understanding, and just having cross-identity conversations about how white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism and all the things manifest in an intersectional way in the workplace. I think that will be very helpful for folks. And it's okay to choose yourself first and to withdraw. And that is a privilege I do want to name, to have the choice and the economic access to do that. But it was really healing for me, and it played a big role in deepening my understanding of practice. And that connects to something that Whitney said, which made me think about the extent to which people who say they come to me because they respect my practice, when we get into these archetypes, then completely question, because I'm spoken to as if I don't know what I'm doing. I couldn't possibly, particularly when the tension is with someone who identifies as white and female.
I have a question for you all too, but can I just really speak to that? This has been coming up because the question is, if we leave, if Black women are either forced out or we choose to leave, then what happens to the work of anti-racism? What happens to racial equity? What happens to racial justice? And these organizations are better because we're there. So then we just end up, our whole society ends up going back to racism when Black women exit or are forced to exit. And don't we feel some kind of obligation to stay, right? To do this important work. And so I wrestle with that. And at the same time, you said it, Kay, that we also get to decide and choose like ourselves, you know, like there's this kind of history of choosing so many others. It's not just at work, it's in our families, it's in our communities. And so I think that there is a space and should be a place for Black women to say, you know, no more. No more of this for me. I'm going to go and do something else. And that is also part of our liberation, right? So it's the working, you know, there got to be people who are pushing against the system, and then there are people who leave. And I think that's also part of it, and there should be space for it. It's not some sort of betrayal because a Black woman says, I need to stop and go and take care of myself and remove myself from these painful, toxic environments. So I just wanted to echo and to talk through that with you, Kay. One question that came up for me as I was
Can I ask
reading
you
your...
something before you move on?
Yeah.
Because people may not know this, and I think it's important for people to know the work that you've done around the research over the last few months of how high the rate of Black women being pushed out actually is. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's very informal research, Cyndi. But I put out a call on social media. Can you hear me better now, by the way? Yep. I put out a call on social media after Dr. Claudine Gay was forced to resign from Harvard University, and just asked, like, is this happening to Black women? The specific experience of being fired or forced to resign. And within, I don't know, 10 days, I got like 100 in-mails on LinkedIn and IG. And so quickly put together this survey just to ask, like, what happened to you? Who caused the harm? How are you today? And the stories were, I know I used this word before, but I'm going to use it again. They were stunning details about what has happened to Black women. Details about like what they described as like, you know, the toxicity, the abuse, the verbal attacks. There were stories of being fired or forced to resign after implementing the very changes they were hired to implement. So changes consistent with DEI. You're brought in for that reason. And you start to implement those changes and you are shown the door. People talked about being fired or forced out after some reference to fit, to their dress, or to their affect. We know about this. And so they just poured out these stories. I know you didn't ask this, Cyndi, but one of the hardest parts of this process of looking at the data for me was the mental health impacts that people talked about. Very classic. I mean, the way they read, it read like for people who are not in the mental health field, there's a book called DSM-4. I think it might be more than that now. And it tells you the symptoms to classify as being clinically depressed or clinical anxiety. And folks were naming the exact things: intrusive thoughts of self-harm, thoughts of suicide, actual self-harm, actually, sleeplessness, can't sleep at night, sudden weight gain, sudden weight loss. Like the level of mental health and even physical, higher blood pressure, hives, stomach ache, gastric issues, body aches, headaches. I mean, it was on and on and on. And so I'm just grateful that these women who I don't know these women, felt like they could, in this anonymous survey, like detail what they had been through. And for some of them, they're doing better. They know what they want in a workplace now. Some are, they say they're still working to heal. So they're getting there. And then for some, not okay. Still depressed, still angry, still sad, still traumatized. And I just get emotional talking about it because it's so very real and painful. So I don't know if I answered your question, but those were some of the results from the survey.
Data is hard. I
Yeah,
was
it
there.
is.
You called the meeting to talk about the data. And
Yeah,
it was very hard
yeah.
to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to ask one question of Kay and
Yes.
Whitney. I saw when I read your article that you didn't, I know that there are plenty of archetypes and you chose these three, but I wonder if you made a decision intentionally not to choose Jezebel, the hypersexual characterization of Black women. There's an article in Walrus, a Canadian publication, about a woman, Tamra Termitus, who was hired by a government entity to do DEI work, and she was forced out. And one of the things that someone had either written about her or something was that she wore whore boots. And when I saw that, I was devastated to read that language. And so I just think about Jezebel and how Black women get, and girls get hyper sexualized inappropriately. And so I just wonder if you made a decision not to include Jezebel.
I'll respond, and then I know Whitney has a point of view. So no, it wasn't intentional, at least not on my part, and I'd say on our part collectively in terms of how we did the article together.
Mm-hmm.
When I was responding to Whitney, I was talking about the things that the top notes for me. And
I
so
see.
if I were to list them all out, workplace and sort of society broadly, I would absolutely include Jezebel. We can talk about what happened to Fannie Willis. I may be getting her last name wrong recently, but yes, absolutely. And I feel that when things go wrong, as they pretty much almost always will, inevitably in the workplace, and particularly when you're in a senior position, that's when the Jezebel will often rear its ugly head. But it wasn't conscious. It's absolutely relevant. And that was my top three, so to speak. But Whitney, please.
Got it.
Nope, that's it. But grateful that you brought to the space that as well. So thank you for that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Can we move on to the next question? Okay. What helps? How do we get through this?
I'm happy to start us off if you would like. So I've been thinking about this, and I'll say for me, it's three things. One, Kay mentioned this, having allies within the organization who can use their privilege in support of me. So I'm so grateful to have Samson Gurma, who's a Black man, as our co-founder and the COO of Service Never Sleeps. So not only is he a great friend, but it's so transformative to be able to work in relationship and trust. But he's also great at respecting and amplifying the fact that I am the leader, and is setting the example of being able to follow that. But also then there's a critical way that he's able to be supportive as a Black man, right? In his allyship, he can use his male privilege to say the thing that needs to be said and not face the backlash or be listened to. He can back up my position. He can repeat what I just said that nobody listened to and then give me credit for it when suddenly people take it in. And he can also play a really critical role of protection for me. So having a Black man as my number two who shares the identity of being Black, but can also leverage his privilege as a man and be an ally is critical. And I think it just makes a difference for Black women leaders to have allies within the organization at all levels, but particularly in those deputy and senior suite roles. And I also just have to shout out my mentor, Niels Ribeiro Yamofio. He's an advisor for Service Never Sleeps, who also does that with the board. And when I talk about the internal, the dynamic applies with staff and board. And so I just have to name that. The other two, I'll just say briefly, is other Black women. It took me a couple of years to process what was happening. And I came into the role knowing how difficult it would be externally and what I would have to face. But the depth and harm and toll of the internal situation was very much a shock to the system. And I was literally being gaslit and manipulated into believing that I was constantly the problem and doing something wrong, even though I was literally contorting myself and contrasting myself nonstop in reaction to the feedback that I was getting. And so it's Black women who helped me understand how something systemic was happening, and having a relationship and community with other Black women leaders, other Black race equity practitioners, it's literally saved me. Because in a world that is just constantly harmful, other Black women have supported me. I truly don't know that I would not have made it without Kay. Like, I would not have made it over these past couple of years without Kay. I would not have made it without my mentor, Erica Hines, who wrote the Black Women Thriving Report, and so many other Black women that I speak to regularly. I would not have made it without in this space. And I'll say it's literally a requirement for me now. Literally, I have to engage with at least 2 other Black women every week as a part of my work schedule. I'm not kidding. That's not a joke, because it gets real lonely. And to Yanique's point about the health tool, we're seeing the data about how loneliness is literally one of the biggest detriments to health. So we have to build that community with others for validation, for encouragement, for accountability, and also just for joy. And the last thing that I'll say, which is so much gratitude to you, Cyndi, is having other resources like this webinar, like Nonprofit Quarterly, like the amazing issue that just got published, other articles, other books, videos, interviews. Not only have they helped me unpack what's happened, but I've leveraged them as a way for others to learn, understand, and be better in proximity to me. Even though I'm a practitioner and I have this lived experience, the fact of the matter is that I'm rarely given the benefit of the doubt, and I'm doubted often. And the majority of the time, it will take someone else saying something in order for it to be considered or accepted as truth. So part of my strategy now is that I literally have people absorb external content somewhere else and before having the conversation with them. And then I can reference the resource and say, so remember that article that you read, or that video that you watched that you said was so transformative and powerful and taught you so much? Remember how that exact same thing happened here last week? Or you said that exact same thing to me an hour ago? Are we drawing association here? So resources like this have just been everything in terms of helping me push for my own equity and also bring others along. So those 2 things: allies, other Black women, and external resources that I can leverage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that, Whitney. Yeah, I'll share with the audience who may not know, we put out a call for articles for this magazine. I had been hearing nothing but these kinds of stories from my peers over the last year and a half. And I knew that this next issue had to focus on that because I felt like it was the biggest untold story in the sector. I don't think there's been one woman of color, especially Black women leader, that I've spoken to who is not going through something like this. And when we put out that call for articles for this magazine, within about 2 weeks, 10 days, we had 60 submissions. We couldn't fit all of them into the articles, into the magazine. Some of the articles will be posted online, but it was amazing. And I hope you do get to check out this magazine, this issue that's coming out. It is very, very powerful. The stories and the way that Black men are articulating our experiences is just very, very powerful. And thank you, Whitney. I'm glad that it helps because that was the intention. Dr. Yanique Redwood, what do you do? What helps? How do you get through this?
Y'all don't have to call me that. Like certain people do.
I like calling you that.
certain people do, but not you three, this call. Okay, so I do want to say I want to talk about some experiences, but I did just pull up some of the data from that informal survey, and what I asked, what helped? And almost half of the women said a therapist, a really good Black woman therapist. I've had my own like positive experiences here. Colleagues who supported them as they were leaving. A spouse or partner or family member was the next one. Just like Whitney just said, Black women friends. And then there was a group that said nothing helped. So I was really concerned about that group before some other kind of like a doctor or, an attorney, things like that. So I did want to contribute that a really solid, trauma-informed therapist, I think, can be and has been really helpful. It's been helpful for me. And when I looked at the survey results, Black women were naming therapists as the #1 source of help, helping them to get through. I just want to stay here a little bit because I think, and I'm not sure, but I think many Black women may hesitate to call this trauma. It seems like, either part of work or, I had a bad experience or a bad boss, but the trauma word may feel a little strong. And I'm here to tell you that these experiences are traumatic. The frame that I use in my work now, trying to support Black women, is around either racial trauma or racial battle fatigue. And I just want to read the definition of racial battle fatigue, if I can find it, which I'm not right now, so I'll get back to it. But many people might have heard about the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And so sometimes we end up being in therapeutic situations, maybe using cognitive behavioral therapy. I love CBT, so I'm not saying that it's not helpful, but you end up here a lot. You end up in your head trying to figure out what has happened, how to negotiate it, how to work through it. And I think what has been helpful about trauma-informed therapy and is the use of somatic practice, so that the body has kept all of the pain. People describe feeling it in their bodies. And it actually works on the body as well, right? Like your health deteriorates. There's so much research on weathering and what has happened to Black women's bodies, how we're aging faster. I'm 48, but I know chronologically I'm 48, but biologically I'm probably about 55 because of racism-related stress. And so being able to work out that stress through the body, I think, is really important. It can't just be intellectual. And so for me, my own healing journey happened really accelerated when I started to use my body to heal. And so I found my definition of racial battle fatigue. I just want to read it. It describes the cumulative result of natural race-related stress response to distressing mental and emotional conditions. These conditions emerge from constantly facing racially dismissive, demeaning, insensitive, and/or hostile racial environments and individuals. This term was coined by Dr. William Smith in 2008. Racial trauma, defined by Resmaa Menakem as the result of ongoing violations of the Black body and heart. And so I just want to really name that this is trauma. This is a trauma experience. people talking about having PTSD. When you remember it, you start to like shake, you start to cry, you start to feel teary, even if the experience happened 5 years ago. And so I think one of the things that helps is to really have a solid therapist who understands what it means to be a Black woman at work and can help you process this trauma using your body. The other thing I just want to say is that I saw with my own eyes this past weekend. I hosted 7 Black women at my home here in Jamaica for a retreat. And I felt like my whole job was to make the process just really easy, like make the place beautiful, have the flowers. You don't lift a finger, you don't labor, you just get to be here, to be in the safety of a community. You get to take in the nature. You get to be loved. And so like after all that we do for our families and communities, I'm thinking a lot about what helps Black women to feel loved and cared for, to be looked out for. And I did this with 7 women, but there are thousands more. There's 7,000, 70,000 more. And so what is the systematic way that we can demonstrate this love? What is the systematic way for us to help Black women process, to repair the harm done to Black women? Is what I'm thinking about today. And I think that is what helps, right? There are others who are hosting these spaces for Black women to just be and to be in community and to heal. We need those. And I'm thinking about what is the systematic way to create that infrastructure for Black women. So those are the 2 I'd like to offer.
I love that question. What is the systematic way to create, I would say, a culture of love for Black women leaders? I wonder about that.
Well, thinking what Yanique and you and Whitney have said made me think of the systems we have to create for ourselves, which I think is what they spoke to. So I think there's a macro answer to that question. But I did want to affirm that the micro answer for each of us is to have your sister circle. So folks like Whitney on Equity in the Center's board, they're Black women who have held me up, as well as women allies who have held me up, Geraldine Coffey, Amanda Nderi, Erica Hines, who's also a co-founder of Equity in the Center, and also Andrew Plumley, who is a co-founder of Equity in the Center, who taught me that equity is possible across gender lines in a senior level leadership partnership. And I think our relationships with allies keep us hopeful because it teaches you what is possible in the world. And Andrew worked with me in the same way that Samson works with Whitney. And as a Black woman, to have someone by your side who does love you and who leads with love, and in that love will hold space for you and provide cover for you, but will also hold you accountable for doing what needs to be done for yourself, for the work, and for other people. It is possible. And it's what can help to keep us going. And we have to take care of our bodies because this work is also killing us, which is something I am very conscious of and have talked about, with Andrew, with other colleagues. And so I think that's my learning edge, the need to be able to take time to recover so that I can persist, because this does literally seek to kill us. And I think as you enter middle age, that's when you begin to actually experience it. So definitely agree that you need to seek out spaces to heal your mind and your body. And so that you can be hopeful and you can help your people get free. Because if we're ill and we're sick, like we're not gonna, you can't help anybody get free if you are yourself in bondage to illness. At the systemic level, I think the way that Equity in the Center's board supports me in leadership, so that infrastructure that both Yanique and Whitney spoke to as almost always lacking for a Black woman leader and for leaders generally, where the board, even when made up of people of color and folks of other historically marginalized identities, perpetuate the harmful dynamics that white supremacy make real in our everyday work and broader lives. So I think the way that I have been able to be in partnership with members of my board of directors in a workplace around issues of equity in the workplace is an example of what can happen when you have folks who have deep equity practice, as Whitney was speaking to, in leadership roles, but also in governance and infrastructure positions, where they can hold space for that deficit mentality about our leadership as Black women to not be the norm. I do know what it's like to not have your board of directors believe you are capable, credible, worthy, and how you're able to thrive in that space. So I think increasing the equity competency to the extent that we can of leaders in the sector to model for others what is possible, in supporting each of us individually and collectively, and not believing the lies that white supremacy will tell you and continues to tell us about ourselves and our deficiency. There are others among us who will pour into us in the way that Whitney and Yanique described. And that has been my experience with the folks who are on the board at Equity in the Center. And I know I'm profoundly privileged in that regard. So I think the extent to which we can build, as we say, a race equity culture within organizations and across the sector and in broader society, people bring their practice into every space with them. And I think that can begin to achieve huge gains, not just for Black women, but as we know, for people of all identities, because if we can survive, then so can everyone else, and thrive, then so can everyone else.
Kay, as I told you, you're the only person that I've spoken to this past year and a half that has had a board that supports them the way that you have been sharing. And I'm really happy that you have that. Whenever someone's asking me, is there anyone who has that? I say, yes, I do know one person. I wonder if you have anything to add, Whitney, to that. How do we create a culture of love for Black women leaders?
Thank you so much. And my internet's being a little shaky here, so just holler if it's causing any problems. I really appreciate this question because it really, it pairs with this question of like, why are we doing this? Why does this matter? And I just love the reframe because it's so disruptive, because we've really been conditioned to expect the opposite, right? Like we've been conditioned and expected to be strong and resilient in this world that doesn't love us, because we're told and tell ourselves that these trials just come with being a Black woman. And I reject and rebuke that. And it also exempts people from their work, and it's coming at our expense. And so like this concept of like how to love Black women is so critical, because it stems from the fact that like our lives depend on this. As Yanique was saying, like this is literally killing us. It's threatening our safety. And I don't say either of those terms lightly. My mental and physical health have taken tolls, not just from doing equity work, but specifically from how I'm treated and what I have to do and put up with as a Black woman leader. And you see these stories in the news and hear about it in proximity around Black women getting so sick and even dying, and our livelihoods being threatened as a direct result of these positions. And that should be alarming for people. That should emphasize why this term of like loving Black women, urgent thing that needs to happen. Because we deserve to thrive as leaders, and that we shouldn't have to choose between leading as martyrs or not being able to lead at all for the sake of our health and safety. And I've been told several times to just do my own thing, because like institutionally the setup here is not for Black women to receive that love and care. But I feel like that's letting people off the hook from showing up accountably and ethically under Black women, and also stripping Black women of the opportunity to lead institutions that we're rightfully equipped to do. And like Kay closed saying, like everybody would benefit from this. Everyone would benefit from getting this right. There's something special about Black women leadership, that deep care, that intuitive and informed insights, that creativity and innovation. Deep down, people know that and know that we've got issues. That's why you hear things like support Black women, but you also hear things like trust Black women, listen to Black women, follow Black women. these phrases indicate that even if implicitly, there's something wonderful and unique that we have to offer in our leadership, and there's and that everybody would gain from us being thriving, whole, healthy people, right? Out of principle, what we deserve, but that would literally make everything better for everybody. And so, how we do it, I think it's the many things that have been said by Kay and Yanique. And what I'll just say here is that, as a millennial, first of all, I have to just name publicly how honored I am to be a part of this conversation, because I've literally admired the three of you and learned from your leadership literally for years. I'm not kidding. Yanique, don't even get me started with how many people I bought your book for when it came out. Don't get me started. And it's quite profound to see that I have shared experiences with other women who have been doing this work for longer than me, which shows that this persists. And I'm also so grateful for the Black women who have mentored me and covered me and have poured in, tenfold the love that we sort of systemically don't get. But I also look around and I see that a lot of my millennial peers are not taking these jobs. They're looking and saying, no, thank you, because they don't want to deal with the mess and the harm, and rightfully so. And so I think it just indicates that so much brilliance and power are being missed out on by not having the infrastructure in place to truly love Black women. And there would be a loss there, which is already starting to happen as Black women of my generation are saying, no, thank you. So I realized I got a little bit away from the question there, but I guess it was sort of meant to just really emphasize why this question of pouring into and loving Black women is so important, because it should happen out of principle. First of all, I always say, don't do it because you benefit, do it because it's right. But also, like, the point of liberation is that when you really center justice, then everybody gains from that. And so it is in everybody's benefit to really pour into and love Black women and Black women leaders, particularly as we center this conversation.
Thank you. So as we go out, I have a question that someone placed in the Q&A that I'd love to pose as a checkout question. And it's around what needs to change in the nonprofit sector in terms of structures or processes or anything else in order to support Black women leaders. Even if it's just one thing, what's the thing that you think absolutely needs to change?
Cyndi.
Yes.
I so don't want to answer this question. So I'm going to answer it, but I'm going to say why I don't want to answer it. So the reason why is because we, Black women, are always in the position of thinking about change, right? Like, we're always in the position of innovating. I think maybe that was your word, Whitney. Trying new things, experimenting, because this society just wasn't built for us. It wasn't built for our families, our people. So we're trying to change. And so I do get this question as it relates to the book. And I have just been saying, I'm not looking for this book to cause change in the sector. I'm not looking for structural change right now. I've done that. I've been there. I've spent my whole career trying to do that. All I want right now is for Black women to feel seen and to know that it's not you. You're not the problem. And just kind of stay there for a while. Just let's stay with being seen. So that's why I don't want to answer the question, but I'll answer the question with one thing. In the article, I talk about the need for the philanthropic sector, which is where I came from, to really step up and step into supporting this kind of infrastructure that we're talking about, a love infrastructure, a repair infrastructure for Black women. either in the sector, outside of the sector, whatever. Like we can't have too much of it. And so I think philanthropic organizations, they don't have all the money in the world, but they do have resources that can be used to experiment, which is what I've always loved about the sector. There are resources for experimentation. And I think given the groundswell of studies, the articles, what is happening to Black women, like it is every time I open my social media, this is the topic. So now is the time to step up the resources for this kind of care, love, repair, transformative justice infrastructure for Black women. And so that's what I would offer, that the resources be unleashed for that kind of system.
Thank you, Yanique. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The big
Whitney?
question, Cyndi. I have a short answer. Trust Black women. Full stop. Invest in them, capitalize them, don't doubt them, don't undermine them. But the shortest way to say that is trust Black women with your endowment funds, with your grant funds, with decisions. Trust Black women. There is no one thing. I truly believe that can be done. It's many things that need to be done together. And that's a lot of what we talk about at Equity in the Center and building a race equity culture. I also think it's a lot of what building movement projects, many race to lead reports have also talked about. So some places you can look for things. Edgar Villanueva and Decolonizing Wealth in terms of repair, which Yanique talked about, also has a framework. So there are resources out there and places where you can look to for tactics. Underlying trust-based philanthropy as a framework, trust Black women, operationalize that. And there are lots of folks out here who can help you in doing that. It's sad to hear, Cyndi, that I'm the only person who shared that they have the support of their board. And so just in closing, I did want to thank them again. And I called some of their names, but these are some of the folks to also trust, to follow in terms of leadership. So Holly Delaney Cole, who's another Black woman coming from philanthropy, similar to Yanique, and then allies, Carly Hare, Sean Thomas Brightfeld of Building Movement Project, and Maggie Potapchuk. So all the things that I try to apply, I have learned from them and from other folks in the field who have believed in, loved, and invested in me. So folks like Inka Mohammed, Lori Villarosa. Love shows up in a lot of different ways. Trust is one of them. So is rigor around accountability in love. So trust Black women.
What do you mean rigor and accountability of love?
Rigor and accountability in love, holding you accountable for your complicity in the system that you want to dismantle in love. I think a lot of what each of us has talked about are folks' attempt to hold us accountable for doing something they don't believe we can or should be doing. Like, how dare you is up under a lot of things that people say to me. How dare you be this way? How dare you make this decision, even though it's my literal job? Holding us accountable for our role in perpetuating a system that we say we seek to dismantle. It's always a both and. I don't know when we're going to get free, but maybe when we get there, there will no longer be this constant tension between actively trying to dismantle a system and resisting the urge to be complicit in it because that's how we were socialized. And so if someone loves you, they're going to help you show up in that fullness. And hold you accountable. And Andrew, my working relationship with Andrew is a really good example of that. Because I remember one time we were having a really tough situation we were navigating around building a race equity culture. And I told him I stopped just short of saying the hardest thing. I said some hard things, but I didn't say the hardest thing. And he said, you should have. And so that's what I mean. But he said that in love. And I think there's a way that people are trying to hold all of us accountable that is not rooted in love. And we've been speaking. Much of that is generational. Much of it is related to our presenting as Black women. But there can be rigor and accountability in a relationship that is rooted in love and care.
I really appreciate that, because I think one of the core challenges of being a Black woman leader is that there's such a challenge even to the concept of leadership. So I think to be able to it feels like a very tenuous time to lead, right? When anything having to do with leadership is just wrong. And the fact that you happen to be a Black woman is just, part of a larger culture. But but you may have a board that expects you to lead. And so there's just kind of, you're caught between these different dynamics having, that are playing out right now. So I appreciate that part. We do want to be held accountable, but there's a way to do that in love. Whitney, what do you think?
Thank you for that question. What I'll say is that, I know we've lit it up over these past 90 minutes, and there's so much importance in that, because you got to say the hard thing and speak the truth to power in order to work toward better. And I say all that because I think that it's so much more possible than people think it is, right? Like, the problem seems so large and overwhelming in terms of its impacts, but the shifts are tangible. And for me, the simplicity of it is, say, imagine if what is expected of Black women were reciprocated, right? And I think that Black women are so often disregarded, or people become so self-centered when centering Black women, because society is contrary to what happens in society. There's so much data around, particularly like Erica Hines' Black Women Thriving report, that notes that if you center the care and needs and support of Black women at your institution, by effect, everybody will benefit and gain from that. And so, like, that is the tangible part of it, is if you just have a reframe that is actually centering what Black women are expressing as our needs and what would help us thrive, everything would be better for everybody, and everything would be different by literally just listening to us, treating us as people, and caring about us too, as opposed to expecting that just extracted from us.
Well, thank you so much. Any last words? I see in the Q&A someone wrote, "You are all amazing," and that is true. You are all amazing. Thank you for the work that you do and for speaking out at this point. It's really important. And any last words before we close out?
Thank you, Cyndi. You've been a firebrand and a beacon, I think, for each of us. The work you're doing at NPQ is really transformative. And you asked us a really hard question at the end. I don't think there's any one thing you can do, but as Whitney said, reading Erica Hines' Black Women Thriving report, there are a ton of recommendations specifically around Black women. So for me, let that be the last word. But thank you, and thanks to each of you who have really inspired me along the way these past years.
Thank you.
I also want, I just want to echo Kay's appreciation for you, Cyndi. This issue, it is just stunning. It's not only visually beautiful, but so rich. And I'm honored to be a part of this issue. I think I would just offer for Black women to really get into your body. Again, for so many years, I was in my head trying to figure this out. And it wasn't until I began to practice with my body, to learn how to regulate my nervous system with my body, that I really saw myself able to just create new directions for myself and my life. And when I think about Audre Lorde and the erotic, I think that's also important. What is pleasurable? Leading from the erotic, leading from a place of like fullness. And then I think, as she has said, you just won't tolerate the shoddy. You won't tolerate the mediocre. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you. Whitney?
Thank you. And I'll just check mark, just so much gratitude for this opportunity. It's been such an honor to share space with all of you. And I continue to learn and grow so much from being in relationship and community with all of you. And just thank you for the opportunity to share without a censor about the realities of what's happening. This often happens in calls and in rooms. And this is just such a opportunity to really amplify this. And so just thank you for that space, and for the folks who were here to bear witness to what we had to say. The work is hard, but I'm feeling a lot of gratitude in this moment for the past 90 minutes that we've had together, which has been personally transformative for sure.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.